Hey Jovanni, it's Lauren again. I hope that your week is going well, and hope you and your family are all doing well and staying safe. So I wanted to send you another story. Since we can't read together, I at least wanted to send you a story from me. So the one I picked today is called Don't Pick Brian, and it's written by Anne Harth. Don't pick Brian, he's afraid of the ball. Brian heard the whispers. His face felt warm. He shuffled his feet. Janie, Peter pointed. Janie skipped over to the stand with Peter's team. Theo, Amy said, you're with us. Theo stood behind Amy. The group of kids waiting grew smaller. Soon Brian stood alone. Brian, you're on Amy's team, Mr. Rich said. Okay, listen up. We're doing something different today. Brian sighed. What now? Today we will run relay races. Brian heard some groans. Running? It had to be better than softball. Line up, teams, Mr. Rich said. Amy stood at the front of their line. Everyone wanted to be first. Brian was last. Mr. Rich pointed to the other side of the field. Do you see that orange cone out there? Everyone looked. Everyone nodded. When I blow this whistle, whoop, you can start. The first person runs around the cone and back here. Tag the next person in line. Then that person will go. The team that finishes first wins. Mr. Rich lifted his weight. Got that? Everyone nodded. Ready? Mr. Rich raised the whistle to his lips. Brian stood on one foot and then the other. Whoop! Amy and Peter took off. Go, Amy! Run, Peter! Peter was faster. He raced around the cone and headed back. Amy wasn't far behind. They pounded back to the start. Peter tagged the next person. Amy tagged hers. The next two raced away. Brian felt his heart beat faster. There were only 5 people in front of him. Could he do this? Would he lose it for his team? Brian would run against Janie. She was fast. The kids shouted and yelled. Brian was quiet. There were only 2 people to go. Theo was in front of Brian. He was ready. Theo took off. He raced around the cone and headed back. Peter's team was still ahead. Brian's stomach hurt, but he was ready. Theo pounded toward him. Brian held out his hand. Theo slapped it. Go, he shouted. Brian went. Jeannie was ahead. Her braids flew behind her. Brian dug his feet into the ground. He ran as fast as he could. He looked up. Jeannie seemed to be closer. Brian ran harder. He raced around the cone. Jeannie was so close. He could almost touch her. He ran even faster. Come on, Brian, his team yelled. They cheered. They clapped. You can do it, Brian. Brian pushed harder. He passed Janie and crossed the finish line. Amy's team wins. Mr. Rich lifted his weight. Now, he said, let's mix up the teams. The kids stood together in a group. Theo and Jeannie are the new captains. Brian stood in the middle of the group. He heard the whispers. "Pick Brian. He's the best runner." Brian grinned. So I hope you like that story. I really like that a lot, actually. So I'll just ask a couple questions about it. So what lesson did the other students learn because of Brian? So I'll let you think about that a little bit, and you can answer it out loud if you want. So I think the lesson that the other students learned is that everyone is good at different things. So even though Brian might not be great at softball, which we can assume because that's what they normally play, and because no one wanted to pick him, just because some people aren't good at some things doesn't mean they aren't good at other things. So we learned that Brian is a really great runner. So that's one of his strong suits. So hopefully that's a lesson that everyone learned, to not count someone out just because of one thing that they know about them or that they might not be good at. So what is the theme of this story? So I guess this is, a tough question. There's probably a couple themes. I would think, one theme is, you know, keeping an open mind about people and not assuming that, you know everything about their abilities. I think another theme could be perseverance, or that word means staying strong even though you come up against hard times. So Brian, knew that no one wanted to pick him at first, and he knew that he had trouble with other sports like softball, but he persevered and he stayed strong and he ran as fast as he could, and he ended up doing better than I think he even thought he could, and better than his teammates thought he could. Um, and the last question is, how did Brian feel when he heard the whispers? And this is probably a two-part question. So, how did he feel when he heard the whispers at the beginning of the story? And how did he feel when he heard the whispers at the end of the story? So, I think, at the beginning of the story, he probably felt sad, right? Probably felt sad and embarrassed that he could hear people whisper that they didn't want him to be on their team. So he was embarrassed and he was red in the face. Um, and then at the end, what were they whispering? They were whispering, "Pick Brian," right? And, make sure he's on their team because he's fast. So at the end, I think he probably feels proud, and we know he feels happy because he was grinning and smiling. So that's great. So I hope you liked it. This was probably my favorite story so far. And you take care, and I will talk to you next week. All right, bye, Giovanni.